What is it that makes people say yes when they are thinking about a purchase?
That isn't what actually makes people say yes. The utility makes it beneficial. Let's not dismiss the fact that the utility is what creates great benefit. But the yes always comes from emotion.
And as we start to think differently, what are the most important things for us to have in line to meet the customer's demands?
Inventory has been more important than messaging because if I did advertise, if I didn't have something on the shelf at the time when the phone call came across, then the conversion rate would be very close to zero.
All that and more on this episode 481 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by the Rogue Food Conference.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Hi, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. Very excited to be joined today by Shane Barber. Shane is a great thinker, and I really appreciate the way he thinks about business and all things related to it. And so I wanted to have a conversation with him today about his journey into selling the storage drinker. And it's been a journey that he's learned a lot about how to sell to people and how to help them say yes to a decision and of purchasing. And so this is a relevant conversation for anyone who is in the business of helping people to say yes to something they're selling. And so wanted to have that conversation with him and let you listen into it. And you will hear that conversation right after a word from our sponsor today, the Rogue Food Conference. Coming to Rapid City, South Dakota, February 6th and 7th is the Rogue Food Conference. There is an optional VIP dinner on February 5th that you can take part in. All the information is available at roguefoodconference.com. You can go there, get your tickets, and use code COWS30 for $30 off your ticket to the Rogue Food Conference in Rapid City. Steve Campbell will be there. Ellen Bench will be there. Michael Sillick will be there. Joel Salatin will be there. John Moody will be there. And we'll have others joining us as their schedules allow. And so when we know for sure that they can be there, I'll let you know who those are as well. But we're looking forward to a great conference and really hope to see you all there and have an opportunity to meet you. And there'll be some live Working Cows podcast episodes recorded there, Q&A times with speakers and those kinds of things. So really a unique opportunity. So hope you can join us at the Rogue Food Conference in Rapid City, South Dakota, February 6th and 7th, with the optional VIP dinner on February 5th. Also an opportunity to attend this year's large indoor rodeo of the year, Rodeo Rapid City. This all takes place during the 10-day Black Hills Stock Show in Rapid City, South Dakota. So looking forward to that. And you can get more information, as I said, at roguefoodconference.com. Shane, thanks for joining me on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Glad to be here, Clay. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate the work that you've been doing and some of the ways that you think about it and the ways that you think about how you can and help people make a decision and move forward with a purchasing decision. And so I wanted to talk to you about that today, kind of from that perspective of the storage drinker. And I guess maybe we should start off by explaining what that is first, and then talk about kind of the journey that you've been on in helping people see the value and make those decisions.
Thanks, Clay. The storage drinker, as you've alluded to, has been a big part of my story in the last decade. And there's going to be a number of listeners that don't have any idea what that is. So we'll just start with the basics. The storage drinker is basically an oversized chicken waterer for cows. It functions as a steel water storage tank that keeps the right end of the animal drinking and the wrong end not drinking. And it's portable. The design has become refined over time, and it's created a lot of value for a lot of customers who are into holistic management, rotational grazing, anything that involves temporary water, anything that involves larger herds than what used to be on the property. It seems to fit a need there, and it's been a great product. The As we've prepared a little bit for this discussion, we'll talk somewhat about the storage drinker, but maybe more about the journey of what it's been like to take that product from its birth to where it is now, and hopefully there's some wisdom that we can share in that journey.
Certainly. Yeah. No, I do think I do appreciate the like you said, like I said, the way you're thinking about it and kind of your own personal journey as it relates to ranching and business and all those things, as most people do. I would say in ranching, they start out as kind of a price taker and not being a price maker, or a price someone setting their own price for their own product or service, and then to go out and to start to think about, how do I actually market something and sell something and get people to the place where they think, hey, this solves the problems that I have, and I'm willing to make an exchange to solve that problem. So, what are some of the lessons you've learned in that process of that journey from maybe conventional price taker type agriculture to marketing this product?
That's an amazing transition in my own thinking. Not amazing in terms of what I've accomplished with it, but just amazing as to how different reality is from, we'll say, the the producer. I always think of kind of the cow calf producer, because we can relate to that person really well. The person that works hard all year and produces um, from the world's perspective, a generic commodity, a a a calf at some weight that is sold. And so then it we receive a price for that, and that's basically a commodity. And I think that's where I would call the baseline of what you might describe as the price taker mentality. And that mentality, there's nothing wrong about that mentality. It's just a way of thinking and a way of doing business. And I believe that when you're in that framework, you often think that in order to receive uh, or make something sellable, make it transactable, all you need to do is create more, or find a really special product that fits a need, and it'll be done. Like, that's all you'll need to do. You create it, come up with the idea, um, manufacture it, and all of a sudden people will just be showing up, writing checks. That's just how it will work. That Although there's some pieces of that are true and that are not false, it's not quite as straightforward as that. And I've learned a little bit of that. I'm sure the amount that I have to learn is much larger than what I've already learned. Certainly, believe that to be true. But as I've learned that it's different than that, I'm not even going to say it's greater than that. It's just a little different than that, in terms of getting customers to make a decision to buy something. And when you start to play in the arena of getting customers to make a decision to buy something, or particular buy something that you have created or something that you have made, it's different than just making a great product and letting people know that you have made a great product. So maybe we can flesh that out a little bit today, and hopefully that's going to be a blessing to the people that are listening.
Certainly. So, do you think it's because it's not instantly obvious the utility of the product? Is that why it takes an education? There's a piece of it there's education that goes into that before they're willing to make that transaction, or is there something else that you've kind of learned is actually going on behind the scenes?
There's uh, I would say there's 3 to 5 primary drivers behind the action of saying yes to something. When we'll take it as an example, the auction environment. Uh, Everybody understands what's going on in an auction environment in the sense that we're doing something very fast, we're doing something emotional. The auctioneer is actually creating that with his voice and with the timing. Even though we all are sitting there and we understand what that is, no one has said, time out. Let's just stop this monkey business, and let's just, with all seriousness, and this is a lot of money we're transacting right now. Let's just get the numbers up in front of everybody on a computer screen. Let's try to not be very distracting about it. Let's just take it serious instead of raise the emotional level. Nobody has done that in the last 100 years. They've not done that because it's beneficial to the seller to keep that emotion in the environment. Emotion is more important than logic. That's one thing that everybody needs to understand. As much as you will drive the actual value of what you have and the utility, as you said, you're looking at the utility of it, that isn't what actually makes people say yes. The utility makes it beneficial. Let's not dismiss the fact that the utility is what creates great benefit. But the yes always comes from emotion. It always comes from emotion. Now, just because it comes from emotion does not make it wrong for the transaction to take place. But we have to recognize when we deal with human beings that the yes decision comes from emotion. And that it's really hard for us, especially if we're the ones that are saying yes, as we think, this discussion, are we describing ourselves as the person that's trying to sell and convince someone of saying yes, or are we actually looking at ourselves as, boy, I've made a lot of decisions in my life and I've had to say yes to which person we're talking about. But either way, the hard truth is that decisions to say yes come from emotion, and that's a platform. Pardon me. I'll turn this off. The That's a hard thing to understand, but with regard to producers that are going to enter into the marketplace of selling things, they need to realize that in tandem with making a great product or creating great value in what they do not dismiss the magnitude at which you need to pay attention to your process of getting people to say yes, of getting people to decide to buy your product, because we do that with emotion, and we can talk a little bit more about the details of that. But that's a concrete thing. So you asked the question based on utility, and I flipped that around and said, yes, the education of utility is part of it, but that's only a step towards getting people to actually make that decision using the emotions that they'll eventually play a part.
And so would you say that that different emotions are going to play a role in different purchases of different things, right? The decision to say yes is going to be driven by different emotions for a car than it is a storage drinker, than it is a bike or whatever, right? Would you say that's accurate?
It's actually pretty close to the same in a lot of situations. Normally, the emotion has to do with reduction of some sort of pain. That's a good way to summarize it. There's a little bit of a flip side, but the only reason that we write checks, make a decision, is that we've understood that uh, there's a gap between where we're at presently and where we want to be in the future. That there's something that is missing in our existence. There's something that's not there, and so therefore that gap is if it's a large gap, we're willing to write a large check. If it's a small gap, we're only willing to write a small gap. And our brain is telling us, and kind of connecting to the emotion of it, of how immediate do I need to fill this gap? Has the pain gotten to the level to where I'm going to write that at that point? That pain, some people would say, well, no, it's not always pain. Almost like pain can be described. Do I want the benefit of something so bad that I will write a check to create that benefit? And so there's something inside that says I have some sort of discontentment compared to my present situation. So therefore, I'm going to make a transaction to fix that. And so that's somewhat emotional all the time. If you think about where that comes from in our life, we don't just go around and write checks for things that we don't need. We don't just wander around and say, "Oh, that's just a wonderful thing. I'm sure that's going to have great benefit. I should write a check for that." You have these balancing things, these tensions within your life that help you to get to that point of actually making that decision.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the Rogue Food Conference. Very excited to be a part of the Rogue Food Conference taking place February 6th and 7th in Rapid City, South Dakota. Opportunity for you to take part in the VIP dinner on February 5th. You can go and get your tickets at roguefoodconference.com. Use the code COWS30 for $30 off your ticket price. Very much going to be a great event taking place at the First Baptist Church in Rapid City. The Black Hills Stock Show is going on during that time, and the Black Hills Stock Show attracts over 300,000 visitors to Western South Dakota over the course of 10 days. So there'll be a lot to see, a lot to do. Very close to Mount Rushmore National Monument. If you want to take a trip up there and see that, it's 30-40 minutes drive from the conference location. So encourage you to book your plane tickets, book your hotel rooms, get your tickets, and join us for the Rogue Food Conference taking place in Rapid City, South Dakota, February 6th and 7th. roguefoodconference.com, code COWS30. Just a practical example for us, one of the pains of grazing is temporary water infrastructure, but the main pain related to that for me anyways, is our water will get very hot for the cattle to drink, right? And so like we're about at now we're down to about 500 feet of water line over the ground into a 50-gallon poly tank. And that is, obviously there's, I don't know, 50 or 60 gallons of water in that water line, maybe less, maybe 30 or 40 gallons of water in that water line into that 50-gallon tank. And so they've got to drink it empty and drink all the water out of that hose before the water is cool again for them to drink. And I've had all the, some of the biggest name grazing experts tell me that water doesn't get too hot for cows to drink, but I've also watched cows lick the water tank and walk away when it was hot and they didn't want to drink what was in there. And so having the storage drinker means that the water comes in at the top, and before it comes out the bottom into the trough, it's cooled off, and they drink more, and that's good, right? Cows that are well hydrated do better. So that's just an example of kind of what you're saying as far as the emotional decision, the pain point, fixing that in our case, in one of the ways that I saw it play out personally. Are there other things that you're thinking of too?
Well, that's I wish that it was that simple. Like you're describing the part that makes sense. Okay, you're describing the part that fix a problem and someone will buy the product. And that's one of 15 things that the storage drinker does amazing. So it fixes that problem. It is a solution to that problem. The harder thing in marketing a product is to make sure that I can get Clay to write a check for my drinker. Okay. I solved the technical part. As an engineer, solving the technical part was actually enjoyable, rewarding, and it was discrete and solvable. Sometimes they're not solvable, but it's like, okay, we solved a problem. Now the part that's solving the pain process has to put this in relationship to what you described. Clay, do you feel like the problem of solving hot water to your animals is worth the urgency and the economics of writing a $3, $4, or $5,000 check to Barber Industries, and to in a sense catch you at the moment when you're actually considering that? For instance, the problem that you're describing is just as relevant today as it is in the middle of January, as it is on August 15th. That problem actually exists on your operation in the same magnitude today, every one of those dates. But you can imagine right now how difficult it is for me to convince you of the significance of this problem in the middle of January. Okay, I literally cannot come to your house and arm wrestle you about this problem and get you to write a check in the middle of January. And that's more about the nuance of marketing, and that's the part that I would like your listeners to try to benefit from, is that if they if they're going to embark on a venture that involves directly working with customers, and they need to understand how the customer sees reality more than just the greatness of their product. Okay, they're for instance, the example that you just described to me is that I need to realize if that's the main thing that my problem solves, I probably won't do very well spending most of my time marketing in January about that product. I won't sell much about that, at that time, because you're not feeling that pain at that time. And also after that issue is done in September, you're going to reallocate the priorities of what you want to spend your money on. Like that problem is done. The urgency, one word that's, if we can step away from this talk and write it down, make sure that every listener can say, what did Shane say with regard to marketing? Do not forget the word urgency. Okay, when you go into a an auction setting, one of the reasons why we use the speed and the volume and the emotion that's there is because we want to talk about urgency. Some people actually need a little bit more urgency in their life, because if they don't get some urgency, they're not going to solve some of the problems that actually need to be solved. So there's nothing dishonest about using a little urgency to describe the problem. If I would think, I don't know, but the way that you describe that issue is that you may be thinking about that issue, or you may be thinking about 5 other issues on your ranch that are similar to the one you just described, and you might realize that you have procrastinated on solving those problems year after year after year because they showed up, and then you endured them, And then when you got to the tail end of them, you literally decided you failed to decide to address those issues, and that same issue will show up next year again. And so because we're all human beings and we go through that type of cycle, you have to realize that just because someone, an inventor, someone came up with something that can solve that problem won't help someone like Clay, who procrastinates fixing those 5 problems every year, unless you can catch him at the right time in his thinking process. So urgency
Yeah.
is the takeaway in that, if that makes sense.
Certainly. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier there's 3 to 5 drivers. One of them is emotion. Is the second is another one urgency then?
Um, the emotion is overarching on all of them. Okay, emotion
Okay.
is everything feeds into that emotion. One would be urgency. Another one, which is really comical when we think about, is this idea of being left out, or the idea of
Mhm.
being a lone ranger, or the idea of doing something that is different than the crowd. That idea is very powerful. Uh, you'll see this you'll see this throughout everything in marketing if you pay attention very closely, and you'll also notice it in human psychology in lots of different ways. We, uh, by nature, do not automatically do things when 980 other people are doing something exactly the opposite. We really look hard at what we're doing if everybody is going one direction. And it's just basic psychology, and it's the way human beings work in terms of our own crowd behavior. If I make the statement that um, every customer that's ever come on my property has bought at least one storage drinker before they left, which would be a lie. That would be dishonest if I said that. But if I said that I've had 1,000 customers walk onto my property, and every one of them has bought at least one storage drinker before they left, that would be a very interesting predicament that the that customer would be in. And if they didn't understand what I said, I would also explain to them that you would be the first person to leave my property without buying a storage drinker in the last 5 years. That would be a very powerful emotional driver in that person's mind if they could understand what I actually just explained to them. Because I think if you're thinking about that statement, you would realize that, wait a minute, what is wrong in my mind that I am not like the other 1,000 people? What is not connecting in the way I'm thinking about reality that everybody else is thinking about reality in a different way? And so that works in in two different directions. There's a lot to be said for nuancing a marketing campaign with this kind of psychology. But let's think about how it would relate to someone listening today, and they want to start a business that includes marketing their product. That they want to start a business that they want to market something that they build, or that they grow, or that they produce. Well, part of getting people to commit to doing that is not just the merits of the product. Um, they may want to know that there's a community that believes the same way that they do. They want to at least know that they're not the first person that bought your uh, hamburger. But the first person that buys your hamburger, that's kind of a scary venture. That's a little bit. It's a little bit. You don't want to be you get it. I don't even have to explain that.
Yeah.
That sounds scary. But
There's
when you
risk.
say, well, I go over there, and I'm just like the other 500 people in my neighborhood that buy hamburger uh from ABC, then that doesn't sound scary. That sounds very popular. That sounds something that is wise. That sounds something like that's a good idea. So that's of the different elements that we've talked about. We talked about urgency. Now we talked about this concept of uh, not being alone, not being singled out, but doing something that the consensus agrees with. Um, this is not something that you need to, as a marketer, try to buck the trend and explain to everyone in your market base that they need to be different than everybody else, because you're really swimming upstream when you try that, because human psychology says I would like to be a little bit comfortable and knowing that what I'm doing is at least approved by 4 out of 5 doctors, 9 out of 10 professionals uh, support this idea. 6 out of 7 very smart people said that this was a good idea. Uh, in the To bring this to light with the storage drinker is, I believe that's one of the reasons why it did not take off quickly, is that the agriculture community, and I don't believe that most of your listeners are going to have to market to the agriculture community. So that's a blessing, because I did say that in many ways, because the agriculture community is a unique subgroup of of humanity. They're a great subgroup, and I'm really grateful that I get to market to them. But I think a lot of that community, they have about two priorities in life. One of them is not pay taxes, and the other one is to make sure that their neighbor is not smarter than them. Like, I think that summarizes a lot of where conventional agriculture is setting their goals. And it's really important that that when we die, that someone else was not smarter than us. And it's really, I of course say that humorously, but I also say that if the shoe fits, um, maybe take a little bit of ownership and realize that maybe some change in thought patterns might be helpful. But with if you take the second idea of making sure that the neighbor doesn't isn't smarter, well, then buying my product, a product that um, maybe the neighbor has bought, so therefore I can't buy it, is a problem. Because if the neighbor's bought it, well, then I can't buy it too, because I don't want to act like the neighbor was smarter than me because he bought it first. Um, and then uh, if the neighbor hasn't bought it, well, what if he knows something that I don't know? And so I better be careful not to buy that water tank, because all my neighbors have never bought it. So obviously I better wait till, I mean, it's a knife that literally cuts both ways, because you're standing around looking across the fence waiting to make your decision, and it has nothing to do with the merits of any decision that's really needs to be made. You're not really able to objectively make a decision.
So if we put a name on this one, would you call it the pariah slash FOMO, or fear of missing out? It seems like it's two sides of the same coin, right? The pariah, I don't want to be the only one not doing this, or the FOMO, I don't want to miss out on something.
Yes.
Would that be
Yes.
a good word for it?
Yes, that's a good word for it. Definitely, it has to do with how we look uh, in respect to other human beings, and there's fear involved with both directions. Absolutely. So that's a good way to summarize it there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then what are some of the other drivers of these decisions? We've got urgency, got the fear of missing out, pariah. What else?
Um, One that's a really unique, that I've never realized how powerful it is. But it's the idea that we continue to do something that we've already endorsed. And I'll try to explain it as concisely as I can. Something that would be simple to explain in today's environment would be, if you voted for someone, you may continue to support them, even if they started to make some decisions that you didn't 100% agree with. You endorse them at one point with your vote, and then you have this tendency then to give them a little bit of license to do more than what you normally would think, because you supported them at one point. It doesn't mean that you'll support them forever, but that would be maybe a good way to describe it in today's time frame. If you can help a consumer make a small decision in your direction, then they will be much more apt to make a larger decision in the future. You don't have to get them to spend $1,000 with you up front. But if you can get them to spend $10 with you, then that emotional connection with you as a salesperson, in this case, or as a representative of your company, connects that person into a continuation to do business with you in the future. That's a really, really strange piece of psychology, but it's very powerful. I'll help people connect to this in ways that maybe they can see how they do this. Once you've gone to the same hardware store about 7 times, you are very likely to go back there again to at least give them a chance to sell you a large ticket item. You're not going to question the fact that you'll at least go in the doors. By default, you will probably call them first if you've gone to them half a dozen times. You won't just forget to go there. You'll say, "Oh no, I'm a very objective, buyer. I always." It's like, no, not really. You will at least give that business an opportunity, because that's a continuation of a habit that you've already started, and it will feel. I would actually say that this is where agriculture consumers do not fit this as much as the general consumer, but the general consumer, once they've established a pattern, they will typically go down that same path over and over and over again. You go to the same gas station over and over again, even if you just like their flavor of coffee, you will probably be buying gasoline from that gas station for 20 years. And even when they stop selling that coffee, you'll probably continue for another 10 years after that, because we become we feel obligated to we feel emotionally obligated to continue to, even if you're not doing it to a person. It's a very, very strange emotional thing that happens to us as human beings, as we get caught up in the habit, the pattern, and we believe we've made some sort of commitment towards doing something, even when all we did was just make a purchase maybe a day, a week, or a year ago. So that's something that if someone's starting a new business, is realize that the most important thing that you can do is somehow create a transaction with a human being, and it doesn't have to be the largest ticket item. You need to connect them to your business. You need to connect them to your product line and get them started, so that they, if I may, they have to make an intentional decision to stop buying from you. They have emotionally decided that they will continue to do business with you. So it will now be more work to stop than it would be to continue. And so that's a very, very interesting thing. So when you're just starting a business, you have to realize you have no momentum in doing that. You have no you have no you have none of the traction that you see uh, in all of the other products that you see. If you're gonna go look at a product, decide that you have a product that's better. It uh, it is far exceeds your competition on its merit. That will not change the customer who is in a habit of buying that product purely because he's just in that mode of buying it from that location at that spot, and you're going to have to switch that customer into a new mode of thinking, and that's going to take a little bit of effort.
Would you call this brand loyalty then, or is it something different?
That's a good way to summarize it. I think that's a good way if I was to put that into the way that agriculture um, customers think about it, is that you're going to have to switch brand loyalty. Yeah, it's the John Deere, it's the green versus the red argument that um, if you if you can step outside of that a little bit, you recognize how the paint color is not providing value to any one of the groups, but it's really hard to convince. It's really hard. I'll give you an example. It's really hard to find someone that is loyal to having both colors on their operation. That's where you can explain it, because oh, I'm really sold out at always having 3 or 4 different colors on my operation. I like to give everybody a shot, and I always evaluate everything objectively. So that's why I always just have a mix. And what's also unique about that is you might find some people, if they're honest, they say, well, the reason that I use this color on my operation, it has less to do with the color as it has to do with the person that has treated me so well at the dealership. They have they have consistently, and it's unique because it's like, wow, that you've spent you're telling me you spent $10 million over the last several decades on this color of equipment, and it has to do with one person's contribution at the sales or the service level and the way they treat you. And it's like, well, yeah. It's like, wow, that person's must be a very important person to you. And you realize that, well, you know, how much did they actually do for me? And they'll realize that, well, not a tremendous amount, but they did a little. They and so it's just amazing how much money can swing with a little emotional leverage. Uh,
Mhm.
we make the joke about of course, the ball cap, the $100,000 ball cap that comes with the tractor, and it seems like it does a lot for the rancher.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so are there more of these drivers that we should touch on here?
There are more. Honestly, I'm not. I believe there's 2 more, and I'm
Mhm.
not in terms of actual marketing psychology, but I'm not going to waste the listener's time in terms of diving into each one at this point. And the main reason is because I'm not amazing at them. I'm not. I don't think I can um, explain them as well as someone can probably articulate them in about 2 or 3 minutes and give the examples. But the biggest thing that I want to point out to the community that's listening right now is that the decision to get your customer to say yes is not simply developing a better product that has better merits and then simply advertising it, as hugely as possible, and and then wondering why the universe hasn't opened up in your favor. And the Storage Drinker, its merits, the quality of what it is and the solution that it brings and the timing in the marketplace is not hasn't changed much in the last decade. What it brings to the producers is about the same as what it could have brought a decade ago. Um, how it's actually constructed and the price point of what it does, it's a little different. It's a little bit more refined. I think it's better, but it hasn't changed a lot in terms of its success in the marketplace. It has changed a lot in terms of that. What are some things that have changed with it? Um, Availability when the customer needs it. I used to build the product uh, exactly custom built to exactly what the customer needed when I talked to them on the phone. The only problem was they wouldn't have the product for about 2 to 6 weeks after they wanted it. That transition has gone from a conversion of uh, 10 units a year to more than 150 units in a year. That aspect is a huge part of it. To be able to have product immediately. Do do does every one of my producers think that they plan ahead? I think they all think they plan ahead, but unfortunately, 90% of my sales happen in a crisis situation. They need the tank now or yesterday, and that is when they would like to come pick it up. So having inventory on the shelf is very important in my particular model. I didn't realize how important that was until I actually um, got down the road and realized that people aren't going to plan ahead to solve their problem. They're not going to write a check for a water problem that happened last year. They want to write a check for a water problem that's happening right now. And if you can solve it right now, that's really, really important to them. That's one of the elements. Making sure that you're reaching past what the customer describes as their problem and trying to actually ask more questions than the information that they're actually providing. If they're asking and they just want to know the price of what you're selling, that's fine. But the reality is some consumers actually don't know, they don't actually know what problem they're actually solving. They'd like to think that they do. We all think we'd like to know what problems we're solving. But maybe the problem that they're solving doesn't have anything to do with my water tank. Maybe it has to do with the amount of incoming water that's coming into their ranch. They might not realize that that's the big problem that needs to be solved, and that my water tank really won't help them as much as they need to solve how much water is actually coming onto their ranch. Everybody wants to, for instance, they want to put wheels under my tank. Most people want to plan for the reason why they want to put wheels under it, because they picture moving it with a small piece of equipment. And I like to encourage them to always think about the hardest day, not the easiest day. The hardest day in moving water tanks is the day after you've had 2 inches of rain. That's the hardest day of moving a water tank, because you're very unmotivated. You have to move twice as fast as what you thought about before. And is this solution going to create more work in your life, or is it going to create less work in your life? I, as a as someone that wants to offer a good product to somebody, I don't want to sell somebody a product that is going to create more work in their life. What's your actual goal? Are you trying to put more money in your pocket, or are you trying to make your life easier? Sometimes those two things aren't don't match up, short term or long term. Helping people answer those questions of what the real problem they're trying to solve has been, I think, more beneficial in my business than just offering a generic product. Being able to actually dig into what they're actually trying to solve has really benefited me short term and long term in terms of the sales. That's been a big deal in my operation.
Are there questions that you find yourself asking consistently to help in that process, or is it kind of just being a good listener and asking the right question?
Being a good listener is always a huge priority because we as human beings are typically not very good at that. And I don't think I'm great at that, and I'm trying to be better at that all the time. So that always needs to stay a top priority. As you, when I speak of you, anybody that's diving into the idea of marketing, need to realize that you're going to have to start to learn to be a very good listener to your customer and a listener to even the things you're saying, because listen to yourself. Try to ask yourself what did you do well, what could you do better in each circumstance and each decision that you make. So being a good listener is key. But one of the simplest questions that helps me is asking people how many cows they're actually trying to water. That's an interesting question because even though I'm not their nearest neighbor, I don't really I don't really I don't really care if they have 20 cows or if they have 320 cows. I really don't. It's not a piece of information that most of the producers that talk to me want to share with me right away. They don't want to tell me how big their operation is. So um, I try to fish that out of them a little bit as to what's the largest group of cattle that we're working with, so that I can help. That's a first one that's very helpful. The second one that's helpful is how quick are you trying to move this tank, and what type of equipment is your best case scenario that you want to move it with, because at that point it really changes what solution they're looking for that they can buy from me. I try to do my best to sell exactly what they need. And sometimes that is different than what they're asking for. And you have to realize that you have to get to a point where you trust yourself as a salesman to know better for your customer than what your customer knows already. If it's a brand new product. And I will it kind of sounds kind of arrogant and sounds a little bit prideful, but I'll explain it this way. For instance, you go to Cabela's or you go Christmas shopping. You're really happy when you bump into someone who knows something about the gift that you're supposed to buy, or the product that you're not an expert on, and you're really excited that you have come into contact with someone who happens to be an expert, as opposed to just going on Amazon and kind of groping around and hoping that this is the right one. When you find somebody that's confident and they say, yes, I've used this one, or I've used this and I've used the competition, and I can explain to you what that is, at that point you shift your trust, and you've shifted it, and you say, well, what's the one that you would recommend? And you really, all of a sudden, there's a big emotional change in that process, because you're like, wow, I'm really glad that I met this person and that they helped me navigate through this process. And that's been something that, of course, comes with time in my product line, because there's no way that I could uh, be honest with customers as to what's the best product until the product line has matured, and to say, well, this has been out for a while, and this is what has worked extremely well for certain customers, but certain customers have used this, and they um they keep coming back for it. Um that To shift it a little bit in terms of, probably the biggest thing that I think helps people have confidence is when I tell them that the largest complaint that I have as a salesperson when my phone rings And while we've had this podcast, my phone has rang 3 times, not all from customers, but it rings pretty regular. When it rings, the biggest complaint that I have, I shouldn't say complaint, but critique of my product is that my customers want another tank. They're not calling because it's broken. They're not calling because they need service parts. They're not calling because they want to complain or they have questions about it. The majority of the time when they're calling, if they have purchased a tank before, they want to buy another tank again. So when I can tell customers that and help them rest easy with the fact that the product actually works, if people digest that, they know at an emotional level, they say, okay, that's good. That helps me feel good, because that means that when I become part of that herd, part of that crowd, that will be my comment as well. That will be my experience as well, is that I like this product and I will feel good about it. And that's really what people are looking for. They're typically unsure, and there's a fear involved with purchasing any product. The fear is that I'm going to buy this product, I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to be disappointed. My family's going to be upset. I'm going to be a disappointment to myself. I'm going to be a disappointment, to my peers, to my neighbors. I've made a poor decision. I'm going to be disappointed to maybe even it might be my father or my grandfather or whoever is looking down on my operational decisions, all these different people that I look around, and I'm going to be frustrated. Even that emotion, if we can elevate that in the process and say, help our customers to alleviate that fear of failure when they make a decision. That's another thing that's happened in the maturity of the product line, is that we don't have customers that are experiencing that negative emotion after they buy it.
Sure. So, a couple of things there. First of all, is the brand loyalty piece is fascinating to me. And you mentioned earlier that consumers of agricultural products don't really have a lot of that. And I would guess that's because the brands that do exist in the marketing of agricultural products don't really have to market, because they're ubiquitous and national and vertically integrated. Tyson and all these others, that just kind of, they have the market fairly well captured, especially on like the pork and the chicken side. But it is an opportunity for those who want to market differently to develop that brand loyalty and be locally vertically integrated, right? Like, you can come here and trust the product and buy the product. So I just want to point that out. And then I have a question for you with regard to the other, and even that one also. But to me, it sounds like your journey has been learning more about strategy and when and how much inventory to have on hand, more than it is messaging. Is that accurate, or has the messaging also been a major driver?
Inventory, trying to answer your question in terms of priority. Inventory has been more important than messaging. I will admit that I've never been I've never spent lots and lots and hours, lots of dollars and hours on marketing. So I can't say that would have that would have been money wasted. But I believe that having inventory on hand would definitely trump the marketing, because if I did advertise a whole bunch, if I didn't have something on the shelf at the time when the phone call came across, then the conversion rate would be very close to zero. A customer is not going to wait 2 to 3 weeks, even though they're making a $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 investment. They really do want that immediately. Yes, inventory in my situation trumped marketing and trumped messaging more so. And that was the first part of your question. Did that cover it?
I think that's it. I think that's it.
Yep.
Mostly.
Yep.
Because I mean, we started with urgency, right? And that speaks to, I've got the inventory to meet the demand when it's there, right?
Right.
So,
what was unique about that, Clay, is that the dichotomy for me was that I wanted to have a perfect solution for my customers. I was able to make a custom tank. The conversation would go something like this in the early years was, well, how many cows? What's your situation? How, are you going to move it, not move it? I wanted to make the perfect tank for people. And so I could make the perfect tank. I could make exactly the capacity that you needed for your situation. I could make it precisely what you needed. But having it precisely what you needed, but not on the shelf, was not as good as having it close enough, but on the shelf. And I think that's that message, if anyone can gain from that, I think they would probably also realize that when they go to the grocery store, every size that you look for is not precisely what you want or need. You're making compromises all the time. It's not exactly what every once in a while you say, oh, that is exactly what I need, but not all the time. And the manufacturer is not out there trying to make it exactly what everybody needs, but there's a bit of what I call the 80-20 rule. I don't know if that's familiar with you, but you're really
Mhm.
shooting for the 80%, and you really don't need to listen to the 20% in terms of your market base. You need to be listening to the 80%, and that's where you need to really focus your energy, is to how to hit that larger consumer. And you don't have to hit everybody perfectly, but hitting 80% consistently is a lot better than selling nothing to 100%.
So would you at least allude to the other two drivers here, just to give people the opportunity to go and find more about them?
Sure. I think we can probably put a link to that, but I got those from, I think I learned about them at Ranching for Profit. I think the video we'll hopefully get a link to. I think it's RSA videos, and the video is what makes people say yes, and they can look to those. We think through them right now. Urgency, and then the commitment, consensus, scarcity, um, big driver. That's a hard one when you have inventory, uh, but scarcity is huge. I'll give you an example. Let's say that someone. This is where it's really difficult when it comes to inventory management. Let's say that we come to a decision where someone needs two 1,400-gallon storage drinkers. Okay, they've decided, we've got it all figured out. They need two 1,400s, and then they say, well, how many do you have on hand? And I say, well, I have three of them, and I have another customer who's coming to pick up one tomorrow. Now, what does that instill in that customer's thought process? Okay, they need two. I've got three on hand, and one of them's going to disappear tomorrow. When do they think that? And I say, take your time, make your. And then I say, they say, well, when's the next time you're going to have them? And I'll say, well, I should have tanks in the next batch I'm going to build is 4 weeks from now. I don't even have to tell that person that they probably should get over to my place and get over and pick them up. They will probably be at my place tomorrow with a trailer, because of the scarcity aspect of that. We as consumers really we really fall prey to the scarcity mindset. There's a limited supply. There's only so many of them. Harley Davidson only makes so many motorcycles a year. Scarcity flies in the face of me having inventory on hand. So that's a challenging marketing aspect when you increase inventory, and then somehow you want to communicate to your customers that if they don't buy it now, they're going to lose out on the opportunity. So scarcity is another big driver, and hopefully all of us, if we think about it, will realize, oh yeah, there was a lot of times that I bought something because they were going to run out if I didn't take part in it. So I think that's there might be one more, but RSA. Hopefully we'll drop that link, and I think they shared that at Ranching for Profit. And there's a lot of different marketing educational formats that will probably bundle this into 3, 2, 7 factors, emotional factors that get people to say yes. But that's one of them. I will allude to, if I will, in my journey, the most powerful marketing that ever happened in my selling of the storage drinkers had nothing to do with my efforts whatsoever. It had to do with some folks in Central South Dakota, and one producer in particular, and he just kept loaning out one of my tanks. And he now has about a dozen of them. And so when neighbors had trouble, then he would just loan out one of the tanks. And I didn't know he was doing this. As he did that year after year, uh, those producers would call me the following year, and they would just order some tanks, and there was no questions. They would just they would just order a couple tanks. Then I finally caught wind of what was going on, and because everybody would mention the same producer that they would borrow his tank, and that was really unique because it floats back to that idea of when you start to make a small commitment towards a product or an entity or something like that. When you start make this very, very small commitment, the fact that you used it, now all of a sudden you've got this consensus, you've got this commitment towards the idea. And that has been very powerful in, I would say that it feels like, I might be wrong, but it feels like 50% of the producers within about a 50-mile radius all have 1, 2, or 3 of my tanks in that area. And that's not something that I can generate. I can't get people to take my tanks, if I just loan them out, because they know I'm the salesman. They won't take them from me for free. I can't generate that because they know that I have, for say, ulterior motives in what I'm doing, because they know that, well, if I take it from Shane, then he will he probably has there's probably some strings attached. People probably believe that there's probably some strings attached to that. So I'd rather say no to that. And they also know their own human nature, that if I do that, I'm also I'm also in a sense taking that for first step towards committing to a larger commitment later. So that was really unique to see that. I would have guessed that in the journey, that was going to be the way that it took off the strongest, was through one person who was basically just loaning the tank out and just try it. People that had an urgent need, and he would just loan the tank out, and then eventually that larger community just eventually decided that the tank is a worthwhile investment and works on their operation.
Yeah. My last question is, how has the form of the storage drinker evolved over time? I just noticed that there are some larger ones and smaller ones, and how has that whole build out of the product line evolved over time?
Excellent. And keep me cut off in terms of time. We started very large and painted. Everything was large and painted and had lids. Large being 4,000 gallon minimum, maybe 6,000 gallon, 8,000 gallon, even 12,000 gallon tanks. Everything was painted and had lids. As we moved to a standardized product, the bread and butter, the 80%, 80/20 of everything is the 2,300 gallon tank. It's small enough to be carried with a skid steer. It's unpainted. It has a skid steer plate on it as a standard product. It has no lid, and it just meets the, not quality, utility and price point extremely well for 250 cow-calf pairs, which is just a really good spot for most producers, because if they have anywhere between 200 and 300 mama cows. That means that a $5,000 investment is not something that's out of line, and it's still portable, and it works great. That product can be moved with a tractor, a skid steer. It can only be moved with the heavier hydrobeds, and so I do weld hydrobed ears on that if the customers are already have a heavy duty hydrobed and they can do that, but I've had some customers that cannot. Then we moved to the 1400 gallon. That 1400 gallon unit is 150 mama cows. It was designed for, when I designed it, I felt like it was the Wyoming model for those customers that needed to, their water points were a quarter mile away, but they needed to drive 30 miles to get there. So let's pick up the tank with the hydrobed, because we just can't cross that rugged draw with a skid steer or a trailer or something like that. So that one it's probably my favorite tank to sell, because it's only 8 feet wide when it goes down the road. And it always reminds me of the Swiss Army knife that is the right size in your pocket. Everybody, I had the biggest Swiss Army knife when I was a kid, but I stopped carrying that one. I carry one that's smaller than that, if that makes sense. And you don't choose the biggest Swiss Army knife, even though you can argue that it will solve all of your problems. That's not the one that you put in your pocket every day. The 1400 is that. It does not solve everybody's problems, but it can solve 90% of them, and it's small enough that you actually like moving it around. That plays into human nature really easy, because generally speaking, as human beings, we like to save time, and we're a little lazy. So we'd like it to be easier to move than the 2300, which, although it is easy to move, it's not as easy to move as something that's a little smaller and a little lighter. I do have a 1,000-gallon tank. That one was created when steel was extremely expensive during COVID. And so it was worthwhile to try to make something that was a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller, and we challenged ourselves to see if we could do it. We did it. It's not my favorite tank. It is a good tank for producers that have less than 75 animals. It's a great solution for producers that are looking at sheep or small critters. Somebody asked me about whether pigs would work, and I told him I hadn't met his pig, so I didn't know if it would actually work. He really didn't get the joke, but I figured it would work because they're smarter than cows, but I can't say that it's been used on lots and lots of pigs. Really good for small operators, maybe some hobby farm situations. It doesn't have as good of a price point to capacity. I also make a 3,600 gallon. It's just a grown up version of the 2,300. And that one, it's just not as mobile, so I don't like that one as much. But I've had a lot of producers that they just have really big herds, and the tanks are a little bit more stay put. They're not going to move the tanks as much. 3 of the models now come standard without the skid steer plates, where we can save people a little bit money of manufacturing them ahead of time without skid steer plates. If we just remove them, we haven't saved any money because of the bracketry, etc. Mm-hmm. That's the evolution of the product line. I also offer a 4,000 gallon nurse tank, because I got tired of telling customers that they shouldn't buy their water storage from me because I was too expensive. So I started making cheap storage that could be tied together. And I sell a number of those as well, because a lot of people just use my tank as a extra drinking point, and they're hauling their own water, or they have a lot of water in storage, and so my tanks work great for nursing the tanks together.
So does that one have a drinker at the bottom of it, or is it just daisy chain to a storage drinker?
Daisy chain. Yeah, it's just a cup, an open top tank of water with lift eyes on the top, and it's 6 feet tall, so that you only have to run one float valve for the whole system. So you daisy chain it together, and everything can be put on one trailer. So you have a system that can easily water 500 mama cows, 600 mama cows, 700 mama cows, um, without breaking the bank, and um, has a really good price point for the amount of water that you're working with. But there's nothing complicated about it. But I realize that just because it's not complicated doesn't mean that I shouldn't try to build it. It would be okay. And anyway, what else? I think that answers the question in terms of the different products and the evolution. The tanks have gotten smaller. That's the part that surprised me. The smallness uh, of the tanks is really surprising. I would encourage customers, if they feel like there's not enough water in the design, to give me a shot, because when we started in the design of the products themselves, we didn't feel like the tanks should be this small. But in practice, in actual utilization, I found that that's the case. Also, the calculation for water is always the half drink. In the concept of rotational grazing, everybody understands that they always. I think it's interesting because people calculate how much water in a day, but that's not how the cattle function. You don't want the cattle to only drink once a day. That is not your goal. If that's the case, that they're only drinking once a day, you probably don't have water in very close proximity to where you're grazing. And that's fine. That's okay, but you're probably not going to be a customer of mine if the cattle are only watering once a day. So we take the calculation of a half drink, and that's pretty close to the amount of water that needs to be in storage. And then another question that you need to ask yourself is, how often are you going to be monitoring or checking this water? Because if you want to check this water every 4 days, then you probably need to have 5 days worth of water on hand. If you're going to be, unless you just expect your cattle to be out of water, because Murphy's Law is greater than almost any of the other laws that exist. So if you're going to be checking your water once a day, having a half a day's water on hand is acceptable. Like if you have some backup plans, you don't need to build the airplane so heavy that it never flies. And so that's all you need. If you're going to be checking your water every day, having 5 days worth of water on hand is really not benefiting anybody. It's not helping. It's maybe making you feel good, but that's generally an old school concept. If you have Unless you have zero backup plans. But if you have some backup plans on hand, trust yourself, trust your process, and realize that now your Swiss Army knife in your pocket is small enough to carry and small enough to function and small enough to get you to where you need to be. So that really surprised me in, I'll say, the evolution of the product line, is to see the products get smaller and smaller, and yet see them to be very practical and economical for my customers, who are typically producers.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Call me. 605-381-2525. You can see I'm not afraid to talk, and hopefully not afraid to listen. And they can find me on Facebook, but the only thing that you're going to get there is some videos that are also that are okay, but it's basically eventually going to get to a point where we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to figure out if there's a product that helps you out. And if it's not going to help you out, if I have 30 more seconds, just a principle that I hope that many producers, whatever they produce, whether it's a direct to a consumer or a commodity, I hope they can share in a principle that someone shared with me a long time ago. And that is, it's never a good deal unless it's a good deal for you and it's a good deal for me. It has to be good. It has to be good for both of us. And I think a lot of us in our journey of transactional relationships, unfortunately, sometimes in that journey, we're only looking for transactions that benefit ourselves. That's all we're doing. And I will tell you that one of the principles that has guided me in financial transactions and other transactions, but in financial transactions, is I'm not going to walk away from the deal and feel like it's good unless I know in my heart that it's a good deal for the other party and it's a good deal for me. That's and when you take a look at that thought process, it will help you iron out how to do business in a lot of ways. Me overselling someone or gouging someone purely for my benefit is never a good deal by the definition of what I have embraced as what a good deal is. And so I don't think that anybody can go in blindly talking to a salesman and think that they're going to embrace that principle. But that's how I do business, and that generates a lot of repeat business. I don't do it because it generates repeat business, but it does have a tendency to generate repeat business. So give me a call. That's the way ultimately we're going to have to cross that bridge at some point, whether you want to talk for 10 seconds or whether you want to talk for 30 minutes. We can get a lot of information passed doing it that way.
Sure. Very good. Shane, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Clay. I appreciate you as always.
Very good stuff. I always appreciate Shane. He really challenges me in the way I think, and so really appreciate him and his sharing of his thoughts on what he's learned about helping people say yes to a purchase decision. If you're in the business, we are business people, so we have to learn to help people make those purchase decisions. No matter how we're selling, there's ways that we can increase the return to us if we do a better job of selling it to the end customer, whoever that is. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, kind of in a celebration of the Christmas season, I'm going to share with you a sermon that I gave to a men's gathering on a recent trip to Southwest Saskatchewan. I was invited by Bethel Church to come up there and to preach a series of messages. And I'm going to share with you one that I preached on helping men to lead their homes spiritually. So look forward to sharing that with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.